Hi, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Please join me on my journey to a clean, safe, sustainable, reliable nuclear energy future. Today we're going to be looking at a video by Johnny Harris called WTF Happened to Nuclear Energy. I haven't seen it yet, but where I think this is going is nuclear energy had such a promising future back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as this new, almost sci-fi, ultra-abundant, high-energy source that was super safe and reliable. And then we've had things like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima that have swayed public opinion away from it despite the fallacy of perceived risk versus relative risk. Perceived risk versus actual risk. Yeah, those accidents, I'm not going to deny they occurred, but they were highly exaggerated in the eyes of the public compared to what actually happened with those accidents. Plus, there's this fear of somehow nuclear energy is related to nuclear bombs, or at least with regards to power plants. And no, a completely different process. You can't take fuel from a nuclear power plant and make a bomb out of it. You're missing about 50 in between steps that are very hard to do, at least in the hands of a terrorist. And yeah, a lot of it is just exaggeration and hysteria brought on probably by the media, and again just by people's fear of something they don't understand, because not many people know much about radiation or how that works. One of the things I intend to correct with with my YouTube channel. So again, another reason to go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you wanna learn more about nuclear power and see all of those things. But I digress. Let's see what Johnny Harris has to say about this.
For most of human history, our species has been trying to solve the
This is a 30-something minute initial video, so this is going to be split up into multiple parts. This is part one.
problem of energy. How do we stay warm and cook our food, heat our homes, and later, how do we power our world and communicate with each other? Then, 70 years ago, we found a solution that changed everything. An energy miracle.
A giant of limitless power at man's command.
That's beautiful. Energy miracle. Never actually heard that, but I love it.
We found out how to throw a tiny neutron so hard at a special kind of atom that it would split apart, releasing a huge amount of energy in a chain reaction. First, we mostly used this chain reaction as a weapon.
The shadow of the atom bomb has been across all our lives.
But then, after the war, we started using it for more peaceful things, to solve our age-old energy problem. We learned to control the chain reaction, creating heat to boil water and spin a turbine. And we had electricity. A lot.
The steam turbine portion he's talking about, that's existed for over 200 years. We just found a different way to make heat, and it's beautiful, like they said, a miracle.
Electricity, all from this tiny amount of fuel. This was the utopian promise of nuclear power.
Nuclear is ultra energy dense. Like that little image you showed of those little pellets, that is equivalent to railway car loads full of coal. It's amazing how dense it is.
Clean energy for all, using the simple power of an atom.
Within the atom's heart is not one, but many giants, seeking to provide vast quantities of energy to run the world's machines.
And for a while, we loved it. The US started building nuclear power plants all over the country. Power plants started popping up across Japan.
We're talking the
Europe.
1970s
Soon France
now.
will be getting nearly 3/4 of their power from nuclear energy. All this in a time of oil crisis, when fossil fuels are expensive and getting scarce. The power of the atom was bringing peace and prosperity, abundance. But then, nuclear turned from darling to outcast.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union.
A state of emergency in 2 of the country's nuclear reactors.
The worst nuclear reactor accident to date.
Today, nuclear power is in decline. And they've been trying to
Again, perceived risk of the accidents right there. They showed Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island there. They'll probably talk about Fukushima soon.
understand why. Why, in an era of climate crisis caused by fossil fuels, are we winding down this effective carbon-free energy source?
For zero
what
good
happened to
reasons.
the promise of nuclear energy? Inevitably, I ended up in a conversation with my friend Cleo, who makes a...
For those of you who are returning viewers, I'm a bit more amped up and ornery, but this is the sort of stuff that really, really gets to me. So I appreciate your patience.
called Huge If True. She's someone who's reported on this a bunch before and was the perfect person to talk to help me sort this out.
Why is nuclear energy not like the saving grace of our civilization? We
It
like,
is.
Sort of gave up. And I
People just don't know.
understand why, and I want to understand why.
This is a great story. Yes. I've looked into this in some ways for various videos, but I've never gone straight at it. I've never done the, like, what the heck happened with nuclear video.
I feel like I will have a clearer version of this story if we can do it sort of tag team.
Are we going to do the cynic optimist thing?
Maybe, yes. Here's the plan.
Good cop, bad
I'm
cop.
going to go down the rabbit hole on why people are afraid of nuclear energy. What is the actual deal here? What are the events and the things that freak us all out?
And I'm going to figure out, okay, so what do we do about that? How do we use nuclear in the future?
One other thing, let's see. If I were to pick sort of my top 3 off the top of my head, first would be the perceived risk of accidents. Second would be the whole nuclear weapons will destroy the Earth thing, which I debunked in another one of my videos. And another one would be the whole waste problem that isn't really a problem. We store waste on site in these super tough dry cask storage containers, and they are impervious to the effects of severe weather. And that is after they were stored safely in the spent fuel pool for several years. It's really an engineering marvel, but some people still believe waste is a problem, but it's really not. And I'm talking just the high-level waste that everyone's scared of. 95% of nuclear waste can be recycled or stored on site till it decays away over the order of days. Yeah, waste isn't a problem.
We can compare notes to look at, like, is there a future for this technology, and should we actually be as afraid as we are?
Awesome.
All
Let's
right.
do it.
4 weeks.
Oh, all right. Boy, I know so much more about nuclear energy than I did a few weeks ago, and I'm very excited to share it with you. And Cleo is actually on her way right now. She's about to show up to the studio, and we're going to do a little show and tell explainer, and it's going to be very exciting video. I think Cleo's going to be here very soon. I can't wait to show you what we learned about nuclear energy. Let's go. Oh my gosh, you made it. Welcome to our studio. Hi.
Hi!
Oh, they brought a detector, or is that just a sound effect? I don't see it. Sounds like a Geiger counter.
Just some radioactive waste.
What exactly is nuclear energy? I don't know, but I know someone who does.
I like it. They're using an old school projector that's like from the 70s, because that's essentially, this is technology that's that old or older. It's a nice touch.
Okay, let's do this. We went deep in this on very different sort of aspects of nuclear energy, but we agreed upon 3 major buckets that are the reasons we believe that nuclear has not sort of become the promise of the future. Let's call them nuclear's 3 big problems, and they are
This will be good.
accidents, waste, and cost. You understand?
All right, let's address these points right now. So accidents. So Chernobyl was the big one. 31 people as the official death toll. 50 people died in total, according to an estimate by the United Nations. Yeah, Chernobyl, example of a crazy reactor design where they did not have a proper containment building for their reactor. So it exploded. They put themselves in a bad situation. They had a bad test where they violated all kinds of safety procedures, and even their safety procedure itself was a bit risked. One of the biggest flaws of the Soviet Union and their entire culture, for lack of a better term, when it comes to nuclear power plant safety. 3 Mile Island, 0 fatalities. They had melting occurred, fuel damage occurred, but it was all contained in their building. So they did have to do evacuations, but there were no fatalities. And Fukushima, it saddens me the most about Fukushima that people forget that 5,000 people died due to a massive mega tsunami and earthquake. No one died from the nuclear stuff, and yet people seem to remember just the nuclear part. And that's largely it, as far as at least the major ones that people talk about that are within people's head. So, yeah, they were hugely overblown. Wasn't like Chernobyl, there wasn't a big threat that would have completely wiped out all of Europe if they wouldn't have done something crazy. Part of that's a bit overblown by HBO's Chernobyl series. Now for the waste one. The waste one I just talked about, it's really not an issue. Talked about the whole dry cask. And cost. Cost of these three probably makes the most sense, but it's still not that expensive if you look at the levelized cost per megawatt hour. There's not nearly as much operations and maintenance costs compared to, say, coal or natural gas, because the energy is just so dense that you don't need to constantly refuel to keep the plant running. And while there's high initial costs, at least for building a full-size 1,000 megawatt plus facility, small modular reactors, such as one developed by NuScale, have just been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So that cost is going to be seen as a non-issue too. It's very exciting. But even still, with that cost, the United Arab Emirates has built 4 new full-size nuclear reactors in the past 5 years, and that's about the same amount of timeline we're talking about for a comparable size combined cycle natural gas power plant. So there you go. That's my response. I welcome comments.
These three, and you really understand nuclear's big issue or nuclear's big solutions. I want to start with accidents, because accidents really are, I think, the biggest, most powerful thing in our popular imagination of why nuclear is scary.
Totally.
When you think of nuclear power plants, at least for me, I thought of like Chernobyl. Chernobyl is this really scary event. It happened in Ukraine in the late 80s when a nuclear reactor melted down and then exploded and spewed radioactive material invisibly into the sky. Hundreds of thousands of people had to evacuate, and it turned the entire area into this like toxic wasteland, and it just has this very sort of...
Not sure what he means by entire area, but I'm going to assume he means the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which is a 30-kilometer radius from the Chernobyl plant. So that had that was including a buffer. Not that whole area was completely toxic. It was treated as such for the initial response teams, but especially lately, that area has flourished in terms of wildlife, flora and fauna, and it looks like a nature preserve now. So yeah, people still think it's this radioactive hellscape, but it's really not. And it's survived shelling by the Russians during the war that's currently going on. So it's pretty well recovered.
Scary apocalyptic energy to it. I mean, it's the reason why it's like the subject of this really popular HBO show. Chernobyl led
HBO
to
didn't
death
do that
of hundreds
any
of people.
favors.
I think a lot of people think it's like tens of thousands of people. It was really hundreds of people.
From radiation.
Radiation, exactly. And then a lot of people were displaced. They had to leave, and that causes a huge disruption and is a major human cost. The numbers aren't massive here compared to other disasters that occur, but it's the spectacle of it. Like, you see this and you see what radiation does. Radiation is this really weird invisible thing that like you can't see, but like suddenly if you're exposed to it in high doses, it can start to like break down the very building blocks of your cells and just sort of deteriorate your body like from the inside. Like,
he's referring to your worst case scenario where you get what's known as acute radiation poisoning. I've, like I said, worked at nuclear power plants, worked in radiological controlled areas for many, many years. No one I know has even heard of anyone that's experienced that sort of thing. That's not typical dose that you get at a nuclear power plant. I've had many years where I've gone into the radiological controlled areas at a plant and had 0 dose. So,
really sort of gruesome and hard to think about and look at. And I think that leaves an impression on people. This isn't the only event that has happened. Here in the United States, we had a nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. 147,000 people had to temporarily evacuate. It led to no deaths, but
I think that's surprising for a lot of people.
I think it is too, again, because of the spectacle.
it is surprising for a lot of people, and people are often shocked whenever I explain that to them, but that's absolutely true.
More recently, there was a nuclear disaster, the third sort of big one in Japan. After an earthquake off the coast of Japan, it created this like massive tsunami that washed up onto Fukushima, and there was a nuclear plant there that got completely overrun and broken down and had another meltdown. Okay, but it's not just accidents. Think about...
So Fukushima, let's back up. Meltdown's not a real nuclear engineering term. Again, the term is fuel damage, but theirs wouldn't even really call it that. They had fuel damage, but it wasn't even on the scale that was at 3 Mile Island, which was, again, no fatalities.
Having this invisible, scary thing called radiation. And if you are someone who wants to do harm, and you get your hands on this stuff, you can turn it into a weapon.
And you're not even talking about controlling.
No. You're missing like 50 more steps there between the types of radioactive material that's used in a nuclear power plant versus the type that it would use to make a bomb. Nuclear power plant, let's get to like uranium for instance, is enriched in around a 3 to 5% range. To make a bomb, you need upwards of 90% enrichment. So unless the terrorist also has his hands on 50 big industrial centrifuges in order to enrich all that material, plus they'd have to get a lot more of their initial material, they ain't making a bomb.
Nuclear proliferation by focusing on where people get uranium and enrichment and all of that. You're focusing on once nuclear power plants are built, there's a security risk.
Absolutely. And you see this in like polls and stuff. You have this public opinion poll here in the United States that asks Americans if they think we should use nuclear at all. Not like, should it be the #1 source or should we invest in it? It's, should we even use it as one of our sources? And look, almost 50% of people don't think we should even have it.
That is sad, because it's for all the wrong reasons.
Like we should.
I can't think of any right reasons not to use nuclear now to mention it.
Split.
Yeah, it's a 50-50. The percentage of people who say that nuclear power is safe is going down every year and is at 47%.
What happened in 2001?
That's Fukushima. And it did in me too. Like I feel this. I feel this association with nuclear.
I remember that in 2011. 2011, I was still in undergraduate school. I remember hearing about the great nuclear renaissance, and then that happened, and I was probably lucky to get a job.
Because of these events. This is Japan, and nuclear is in yellow. Right after Fukushima, you see that nuclear power in Japan just gets kind of squashed. So
that's sad. Even worse news for global climate change.
I think for me, the reason why accidents is like the top of this list is because accidents have this big psychological effect on people.
I think we need to separate out, though, risk of accidents, which are terrifying, from safety of an
They're really not, though.
Energy source. Because those are actually two different things.
Safety of an energy source. I don't know what they mean by that. Are they talking security and proliferation, the terrorist thing they were talking about earlier?
What we really want to know isn't how many accidents happen, it's deaths per unit of electricity production.
So
This'll be good.
Every electricity source is.
So I mentioned I'm a nuclear engineer. I also have a specialization in green energy and climate change as well as part of my studies to get where I'm at now. So I'm pretty familiar with what they're going to show. Let's see how they do.
In its own way, and you can measure how many people die based on how much energy you make.
Yes, this is the data for solar, nuclear, wind, and hydropower.
Okay.
So what you can see is that they don't have that
Production
many deaths
only.
per unit of electricity production. What this is saying is that these are all really, really safe energy sources.
So this is we're just talking production here. Wind, people die in wind. They fall off of those turbines when they're doing maintenance up there. It's just at heights. And solar, I don't think this would be counted in this statistic because we're just talking production. We're not talking about every step of the fuel chain. But solar is made from materials such as cadmium and silver that have to be mined. And some of those rare earth cadmium mines look like this horrific hellscape cesspool that I don't see how you could go in without getting mercury poisoning. So those deaths are not included on this graph. So there are deaths associated with solar and wind that people don't think about.
Nuclear is between solar and wind. Like, this is really important.
Oh wait, I didn't even see that nuclear was down there.
Yeah.
Oh,
This
whoa.
includes all deaths from accidents. And nuclear is between our two most exciting renewable energy sources in terms of safety. All of these are
And yet,
safe.
when we think of nuclear, we
Now.
think of danger.
Yes. If you think about our energy mix, how much power we get from different sources of energy,
Holy
that is fossil fuels.
There you go. Great presentation tool. Bring all the big scary. These are the real killers right here for production.
The data that really drove this home for me. So our Walden data, that's the source of the chart that I just showed, did a calculation to really show people how this affects actual humans. So what they did is they set up a town called Euroville. This is a hypothetical town of 150,000 people.
Nice.
And Euroville uses 1 terawatt hour of electricity per year. If you powered Euroville for 1 year with just coal, this is the number of citizens of Euroville that would die. If you chose oil, if you powered Euroville for 1 year with just oil, this many people would.
I'm very familiar with the data they're presenting, but I've never seen it presented in this exact way. This is a great way to do it.
Coal is actually 25, oil is 18.
Okay.
This is just 1 year of powering a town of 150,000
Nuclear is going to be less than 1. I'm calling it right now.
people. Those are real humans with families and lives and jobs. If you chose gas, 3 people. If you chose hydropower, 1 person. If you chose wind, nuclear, or solar.
Hydro's got risks too. One dam breaks, that would be catastrophic, and actually probably more deaths than the average nuclear accident. I don't know why people aren't as afraid of hydropower.
It would take 25 years for
There you
one
go.
person
Yep.
to die.
25 years.
I think it is totally understandable to focus on how scary accidents are. I don't mean to say, like, look at this data, like we're so irrational.
Yeah.
But I do think that if we really cared about human lives, we would be paying a lot more attention to how many people fossil fuels kill, and we would be trying really, really hard
Preach.
to replace fossil fuels with wind, nuclear, solar, or hydropower as fast as humanly possible. And this is before we get to climate change.
Yeah.
This is just production of these energy sources.
Yeah. It's not the carbon ramifications.
Climate change, the overall cost of coal per year in terms of deaths for climate change and other environmental impacts for every year exceeds even the wildest estimates that I've heard for Chernobyl. We're talking like 110,000 people per year. It's crazy.
Another reason, but it's separate from this.
I think it's that the accidents are just inherently scary in the same way that like a plane crash is scary. It's a spectacle. Coal.
Still, though, with plane crash, you don't see a plane crash say, oh, well, I guess we're not going to fly planes anymore.
And oil is like car crashes. It happens way more, but we don't really pay attention. Just genuinely surprised. I would have guessed nuclear.
That is an interesting point right there. If we had more nuclear accidents, would people be as afraid of them? Let me know what you think of that one down in the comments.
I really would have.
After the question of actual deaths from nuclear power and other energy sources, there's also this question of a fear of radiation. You see it in the headlines all the time about living next to a nuclear plant or working in a nuclear plant or whatever.
Yep.
And again,
Dose you get next to a nuclear plant is non-existent.
the thing here is about our human brains assessing risk. So these are a bunch of sources of radiation, and this is a spectrum that's going to help us compare them. So what do you get from a typical chest CT scan compared to taking a flight from New York to Tokyo?
Yeah. Give me one clue. At
So
least.
this one can cause radiation sickness.
Radiation sickness is if you're up at 1,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000 what?
Guess where the other things
Okay.
go.
We talking rem, millirem, millisievert. Well, 1,000 millirem ain't going to give you sickness. 1,000 rem is you're looking at above a lethal dose. I'm not sure what their units are.
Let's start with flight versus X-ray, like chest X-ray, like. Yeah.
Probably millisieverts. Let's see, yeah, because 1,000 rem, a millisievert's a bit smaller, so yeah, that's equivalent to 100 rem, which you're looking at borderline sickness. That's not going to kill you.
Chest X-ray. I go on a flight from New York to Tokyo. I'm assuming that a flight isn't crazy, so like maybe 1. And then the chest X-ray is probably like 10. Man, I'm probably so off.
Just keep going. Keep going.
All right, so I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go here. Did I do them all?
So what I'm seeing from your guesses are you are aware that we get radiation from all kinds of stuff, from flying, from chest CTs, from chest X-rays, all of that. But you have an impression that if you live next to a nuclear power plant or if you work in a nuclear power plant, you're like signing up for more radiation.
And it's probably not like crazy, you're gonna get cancer, but like you're getting a little bit more radiation than if you're just like living way far away.
Right. Okay. Here are the real answers. So a couple things make total sense. The
Like the way she
annual
said
amount
that.
received by a worker in a nuclear power plant is lower than the maximum annual dose. We get that. But a typical dose from living within a few kilometers of an operating nuclear power plant for 1 year is less than a typical chest X-ray, and way less.
And here's why. So the actual nuclear building, the reactor building, completely shielded. So you're going to get almost no dose, even being right next to it. Like I said, I would often go years of 0 dose from working at a nuclear power plant. So, and now you're moving away from it. Uses the inverse square law. You double your distance from the radiation source, your dose goes down by a factor of 4. So now you're going at you're dividing a very small number by an even bigger number. So, yeah, you're not getting any dose living within a few kilometers.
Than a typical chest CT scan, and less than a flight from.
It looks like those units are just relative order of magnitude. I don't think it. Closest would probably be millisieverts if you're curious, but I think this is supposed to just be an arbitrary comparison chart.
New York to Tokyo.
Wow, living next to it for a year. You're living next to it for an entire year, and in one like 10-hour flight, you are getting more radiation exposure.
A lot more. And also, this one is super important. This is the average total dose from natural background radiation. This is what all of us are getting, no matter what, from living on Earth in our particular solar system. That is significantly more than living next to a nuclear power plant.
Do I see that right, though? It says average total double dose from natural background radiation, and it's being above the annual public dose limit? Or is that, or am I not reading that right?
Working within a nuclear power plant, the major lesson from all of this is most of the radiation exposure that you'll get in your life will be from plane trips and X-rays and natural background radiation, even if you lived right next to a nuclear power plant, even if you worked in a nuclear power plant.
Wow, okay. Radiation is probably another one of these sort of invisible, scary things that we maybe over-index on our hesitation about because we don't understand it. And that's how.
And for that right there, you can just blame our schooling system for just not educating people on radiation to the levels we should have. It's all just stuff we don't understand. Another example, I'll use pandemics as an example. People don't know a whole lot much about infectious diseases, But people do know infectious diseases more than they know radiation, so I'd just say it's a much worse version of that, at least in terms of public hysteria.
Radiation to me is invisible, it is scary, what it does to us is scary, and so I sort of associate like proximity to...
Again, I'll predicate that what it does to us in an ultra-high dose in a worst-case scenario is scary. Normally, what radiation does to us is actually beneficial. Where do you think all the warmth from our sun is? What do you think that's called? It's radiation. People need to normalize talking about radiation as an everyday manner, because the sun is radiation. Your eyes are radiation detectors that see between 400 and 700 nanometers of electromagnetic radiation, otherwise known as visible light.
Does that create radiation, i.e. nuclear power plant, as like, oh, well, that's the source of it. If I'm close to it, I'm probably getting it because I can't really see it.
Again, like, none of what I'm saying is meant to imply that accidents aren't disastrous and terrifying, or that radiation in doses that are on the upper end of the spectrum is also disastrous and terrifying. I just made a video about cancer. It scared the heck out of me.
Yeah.
But
the dose on that scale that she just presented us, though, the upper end of that one isn't going to kill you, assuming it's in millisieverts. If it's in REM, then yeah.
Mean that we shouldn't also put it into context. We should put all of that data into context in comparing deaths to deaths from fossil fuels, in comparing radiation to ways that we receive radiation
Absolutely.
in other ways.
Yep.
This is just about putting that risk in context.
Into perspective. Okay.
All right, well, I think that's going to do it for part one. I like what they're saying. They're going fully straight on. And I'm glad I can, step in and add a little bit more to this. But let me know what you think of this down in the comments below. It's sad that my industry, has so much potential, but public opinion has absolutely killed it for, again, all the wrong reasons. Stay tuned for part two. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.